The ZZ plant is the most invincible houseplant you're ever going to care for. It can survive high and low lighting conditions, needs very little care, and can go for months without a drop of water. So if it's so easy, why even make this video on how to care for it? Well, I'm going to show you the difference between just letting it go and the care tips to get it to do what you really want, which is to thrive. Also, like every hero, it does have its kryptonite that slowly, without you even knowing it, will bring it to its knees. And in this video, I'm going to provide you with a solution to that problem. So let's start by talking about where to place a ZZ plant so that it thrives. In an ideal world, a ZZ plant would be kept in an area with bright indirect light. You could either keep it next to a window that receives 12 hours of bright indirect light or under grow lights. But we know things are not always ideal, right? And we have to work with the layout of our homes and the space that's available to us. I personally keep mine under grow lights, and they also get a little light from a south-facing window. And for the last couple years, all my ZZs have thrived under this lighting and grown to where I've been able to take stem, leaf cuttings, and even divisions from them, including one of my favorites, which is this one, my Raven, which has a darker, greener foliage. This is the ideal placement for ZZs, but if you don't have that space available for them, the best part about this plant is that it can also be kept in lower lighting conditions, with the downside being that it won't grow as fast or as healthy, and it'll tend to grow a little leggy and spindly. So this is something to be aware of and look out for. And as far as temperature and humidity, the conditions in most homes are suitable for them to grow and stay happy in, as long as it's relatively consistent and not to any extreme. Just know that, like most of the houseplants we keep, they're sensitive to frost, cold drafts, and even full sun if not acclimated correctly. So you know exactly where to place your ZZ. Now let's get into soil requirements for it. But before we do, let's get in here and let me show you something. You see these potato-like things poking out of the soil? These are actually rhizomes that are a part of a ZZ plant, and these help it go for a long time without any water, which I'll get into that in a second. But since we have these rhizomes, which help store water for the plant, we need a soil mix that drains really well to prevent having even more water in the soil accumulating and causing root rot. So what soil mix should we be using? If you want the easy route, you could go with a succulent or cacti mix, or if you're looking to make your own and customize the soil a little more, then look to components like core or potting soil to retain a little water, and pine bark, perlite, and sand to provide drainage and aeration. And also, as always, make sure your pots have drainage holes. Something else to think about if and when you need to repot your ZZ, which you probably will only have to do about once every 2 to 3 years, is to only repot your plant to a pot that's the next size up. Going to a pot that's too large compared to the root ball will mean you have a bunch of soil in the pot with excess water and not have enough roots to take it up before the root rot sets in. Alright, when it comes to fertilizing your ZZ plants, it's just as easy going. They have relatively low nutrient requirements, and actually over-fertilizing them can cause more harm than good. So my approach to fertilizing them is to fertilize them at half rate with a general houseplant fertilizer that contains macro and micronutrients every month during the growing season, and then reduce it to 25% when the plant growth slows. I'm in Florida, so they grow pretty much year round. But for those of you in cooler climates, I recommend eliminating fertilizer applications altogether during those cooler months. Also, an extra step you can take to prevent burning the roots is to at least every 3 to 4 waterings, water them by putting them in the shower or taking them to a hose outside and leaching the soil with water to get rid of any excess salts that may build up because of fertilizer or tap water used when watering. Another beautiful thing about ZZ plants is that they require very little attention when it comes to pruning, other than the occasional removal of any yellow or dead leaves with clean, sharp scissors or pruning shears to help maintain the plant's appearance and health. Unlike other plants like maybe pothos or even rubber plants, where you need to trim them to help them keep their shape and promote a fuller, bushier look, the ZZ plant actually gets fuller and more beautiful on its own as it grows. And the way this happens is that you start to see new shoots appearing from the soil and just growing up on their own. The only thing I recommend you should do to it occasionally is spray them down with plain water, and with a microfiber cloth, wipe them down to keep the hard, sturdy leaves shiny and help promote photosynthesis within the plant. As far as pests are concerned, with ZZ plants, you may spot the occasional mealybug or spider mite on them. But for the most part, they're relatively pest resistant, to the point that I recently had a bout with mealybugs on my other plants, and of the 4 mature plants that I have and other propagations, I didn't find a single mealybug on any of the plants. But there always is a chance, and if you do find yourself having to deal with them, then giving it a dip in an insecticidal soap solution or heavily spraying them with the soap solution and then adding some systemic insecticide will do the trick to help you get rid of them. And another benefit of ZZ plant is that because the soil needs to remain dry most of the time, you all but eliminate the chances of seeing fungus gnats. Actually, if you see fungus gnats coming from a ZZ, then there's a good chance you're overwatering your plant. And that brings us to watering, which is an area where many plant owners go wrong with ZZ plants, and primarily overwatering. I would venture to say is probably the primary reason that most ZZ plants die, and that's because overwatering ultimately leads to root rot. As I mentioned before, these little things in the soil, the rhizomes, help the ZZ plants to be drought tolerant and require us to allow the soil to dry out between waterings. So in typical indoor conditions, this may mean watering once every 3 to 4 weeks or sometimes even longer. So my approach to watering is to allow the soil to dry out completely and then thoroughly saturate the soil. To check if your plant needs water, you can get a dowel or a moisture meter and place it in the soil all the way to the bottom, and if the soil is 100% dry, then water. I personally use a combination of bottom and top watering so that the soil can become completely saturated and it speeds up the process of watering. To start, put the plant in a bowl and water from the top. Then I let it sit in the water that pooled in the bottom of the bowl for about 5 minutes, as opposed to the 10 to 15 minutes if I only bottom watered. And then I drain the excess water from the pot. Using this method also helps me to prevent fungus gnats, mostly with other plants, since the top layer of soil doesn't get as wet, but the bottom does. And this also helps the plant go longer without needing water. Now that you know how to keep your ZZ plants healthy, I'm sure you'll be inspired by them. And the next logical step is to propagate and make more for yourself, your family, and friends. Watch this video next for detailed instructions on how to propagate them with 5 different methods.